Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this training on NVivo 12 Basics. This training is intended for brand new users of NVivo or users who may have some experience using NVivo but need a refresher. So in this training, I'm going to cover really the basic tasks that you would be asked to perform as a member of a qualitative analysis team at AIR. I will do an intermediate and advanced training later this summer. So if there are specific topics that you're hoping to learn more about and that I do not cover in today's training, it's likely that I will cover those later in one of those trainings this summer. Before we get started, I do want to point out some other resources that are available to you as AIR staff members that can help answer some of your questions that you might have about NVivo. So we have this NVivo website on our AIR portal internet site, and we have links to our videos, we have links to discussion boards and other documentation that can walk you through different steps of how to do certain things in NVivo. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that QSR, the company that makes NVivo, has really great resources on their website as well that we link to on our intranet. So these are really two easy ways to kind of, if you have a question, to explore and try to figure out the program. All right. So I wanted to point out, if you have NVivo installed on your computer, if you have a NVivo license, you'll have two different icons on your desktop. One is called NVivo 12, and one is NVivo 12 Server. So the difference is NVivo 12 is the client standalone version that lives on your device that you alone work in. So if you're using NVivo 12 and you want to share your work with a team, you would have to either send them that file or keep it saved on a shared site. And only one of you could be working in that file at a time. NVivo 12, on the other hand, is a server-side application that manages NVivo in a centralized database in DC. And this allows for simultaneous use. It's really good for team projects. Each team member can be working in the file at the exact same time, and it'll update instantaneously. For this training, I'm going to be working in NVivo 12 just because it moves a little bit quicker than the server version. But everything that I'm demonstrating will be applicable for use in the server version if that is what you choose to use. So I've double-clicked on the icon to open up the program. Just give it a second to think and get going. All right, so if I was starting from scratch, I would want to click on blank project. But since I have a file created for this demonstration, I'm going to go to my recent projects and click on this file, NVivo 12 training. All right. So here is NVivo. As you'll see, it looks quite a bit like a Microsoft Office project in just the way that it is set up. And I think that that's an intentional choice. So the program is really user-friendly and intuitive. You can see that there's a ribbon structure across the top, and then this tab on the left-hand side. So across the top, we have options to import, create, explore, and share. Import is where you would import all of your data sources. Create is for creating codes and other ways of organizing your data. Explore is for running queries and creating data visualization. And share is for creating reports or exporting the work that you've done in NVivo to other formats. Right. And then on the left-hand side, we have our Quick Access tab. That's a new feature in NVivo 12, which allows you to pin your most frequently used items, so you can have them at the ready right here. Data, this is where you will store your data sources that you'll be working with in your project. Codes are basically the thematic containers that you use to store related topics. And then cases, this is NVivo's way of classifying individual respondents or whatever your unit of observation is. I am not actually going to go very much in detail about cases in this training. That will be in the intermediate training later. But I did want you to be aware of what that is. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to go to my data tab. I need to click on File. And I'm going to import a data source. This is where all of your qualitative data sources will live and be stored. In many cases, you'll probably be working in a file where your task lead or project director has already imported all of the sources, but I'm going to demonstrate how to add them to your project file. So you want to go to Import, and you can see that NVivo can work with a lot of different kinds of qualitative data. You can import under Files your classic Word documents, your PDFs, other images. You can also import survey data through Excel and even directly from SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics. You can import from SPSS directly, and you can also, if you're using NVivo for a literature review, you can import data from these bibliography tools, and even from Outlook, OneNote, Evernote, etc. Today I'm going to do kind of classic Word document and PDF. So I'm going to go to Files, and I'm going to find my two data sources that I'm interested in and open them. So I just showed you how to import a data source by clicking on Files. You can also right-click on your Files tab and say Import Files, or click in this white space and say Import Items. So you'll find with NVivo there's more than one way to do something, and you'll kind of figure that out as you go. All right, so as you can see, I was able to successfully add these two teacher focus group examples. So this column that says Code refers to the number of thematic codes that are present in each data source. Because I haven't started yet, they both say 0. And then this column, which says References, refers to the specific number of quotes or pieces of text of each code. So each individual code could occur multiple times throughout a single data source. And in that case, the number of references would increase where the number of codes would be the same. All right, so now I'm going to go to one of these. So let's start with the Word version and open it up. So you can see that as I did that, this Document Tools tab opened up. And this is really just brings up all of the functions that you might want to do when working with a data source, and you have it open. I do want to talk quickly about changing the view and orientation. You can, right now I have it set up. The default is that the data source is on the right-hand side and then your other tabs are on the left. But if it's my preference to switch it up, I can go to Detail View and change the orientation so that the data source is on the bottom. And again, this is something that you can kind of figure out what your preference is as you become more comfortable with NVivo. Another thing that you can do when manipulating the view of the program is click on Undock. And one time that this is useful is if you want to really spread out, you're working on 2 screens, and you want to make your data source really big and drag it over to your second screen and see everything else in the program on your main screen. To make it go back, I just click on Dock, and we'll be back to where we started. All right, so now that we have the data source loaded and open, our first step in doing the qualitative analysis is coding the data files. So we're going to go to our Codes tab. So NVivo describes coding as gathering material about a topic and storing it in a container called a node. You'll hear the words code and node used pretty much interchangeably when describing that descriptive container that you assign sections of text to. But the act of assigning codes or nodes to text, when you're talking about a verb, that is called coding. So in this Nodes tab, you'll see that we have some stuff in here already that's been preloaded. And this is our coding structure, which you might also hear called a coding hierarchy, a coding scheme or schema, a coding tree. It's basically just a list of codes that are based on your research question or data collection instruments that allow you to organize and structure your interview or other qualitative data. So if you're just beginning the coding process, what you'll have and what we have in this example is a list of a priori codes that were identified deductively in advance rather than through a process where you're engaging with the data itself. And your coding structure will often be hierarchical. So you can see I have these little plus and minus signs in this coding structure that allows you to expand and collapse. So you can see this is a way to kind of mine deeper and get more granular to store additional detail or to store related content. So you can see in this example, the analyst who created this NVivo file set up the coding structure to align with the order of the questions that were asked in this focus group. So you can see we have a header for context and data culture, which aligns to our first parent node, context and data culture. We have a subheader called data culture. We have a subcode called data culture. And then we have a code called impressions of software that aligns really well to this first question that we ask in the protocol, which is, in general, what is your overall first impression of the student GPS dashboard? And this is going to make it really easy to know where each piece of data should be stored. One thing that I always do before I begin coding, which is a personal preference of mine, but I think it's a really helpful tool, is by turning on the coding stripes and highlighting. So how I'm going to do that is by going here, under my document tools that popped up only when I have the focus group open, and going to coding stripes. And I'm going to select all of the codes. You can see this on the right popped up when I did that. And I'm also going to select highlighting for all codes. And kind of the usefulness of this will become apparent as I start coding. All right. So let's just start coding to see what this is like. So the first question is, in general, what is your overall first impression of the student GPS dashboards? And our first respondent says, I thought it was very exciting. It was a nice, bright, clean package, and for the most part, very easy to use. So we know that this kind of goes with our impressions of software code. And I'm going to say that this person has a positive first impression of the software. So how to code that is by just right-clicking and selecting a piece of text, and then literally dragging and dropping it to the code that we want to use. So you can tell that we've been successful with coding that piece of text because this number right here under files has increased to 1 and number of references has increased to 1. You can also see that this piece of text is now highlighted because I turned on the highlighting view. And I also can see that this stripe has shown up on the side that is pink and says positive. Okay, so the next respondent says, very similar. I liked the sort of layout of it was easy to navigate and a lot of information if you really wanted it to be there. So I'm going to do the same thing. It sounds like this person also had a positive impression. I'm going to select it, drag it, and drop it over to positive. So you can see what's happened is this piece of text is now highlighted, and there's another little stripe that appears. And then over here, the number of files has stayed the same because we're working in the same data source still. This is just one focus group. But the number of references has increased to 2 because I have 2 different segments of text that have been coded at that node. So let's say I want to review all of the coding that has been coded as positive. I just want to go over to my code, positive, right-click. And this will bring up all of the different references that are included in this node. So you can imagine, I've only done a little bit right now, but if I had continued coding and had several data sources, maybe some interviews and other focus groups, this whole code would, everything that was included there would appear when you click on positive. All right, let's keep going. And let's try to code this question number 3. And this aligns, this question is, could you briefly describe how your campus looked at and used student data before the student GPS dashboards were introduced? You can see that we have a code that's called other data systems that we have in our a priori coding structure, but we don't have any child nodes because maybe we didn't know what those other data systems would be. But we can see in people's responses that they were able to identify what those were. So we have some themes that have kind of emerged from the data. And we'll want to create some child nodes to store those different data systems. So the way that you create new nodes for emergent themes is go over to your code, right-click, and say New Node. So this first respondent says Eduphoria. So I'm going to create a code for Eduphoria. And then I'm just going to do what we've been doing, select it, drag and drop for Eduphoria. All right, this next person says Eduphoria. We use that. I use a lot for writing IEPs, so I use it. So obviously the test data from the state, etc. So I'm going to also say that that belongs in Eduphoria. But as you read on, you'll also see that this person says, we all have our grade book, which is basically good for looking at absences. So I think that this is a reference to another data system that is used. So let's say I want to uncode this piece of text. What I would do is just select it, right-click, and say uncode from Eduphoria. And you can see that that little piece has been unhighlighted because I removed it from the Eduphoria code. And now I want to create a new code for gradebook. And then our third respondent says, yes, all of those things, all of our tests get scanned into Eduphoria. So I'm going to add this one as well to Eduphoria. So let's say I'm interested in knowing how many, overall, how many different kinds of data systems people mentioned. Right now, our parent code, other data systems, just says 0 and 0, because we've only created child nodes. We haven't coded anything to this parent node. So if you want to see all of those aggregated up, you right-click on other data systems and scroll down and see aggregate coding from children. Okay, so now you'll see that we still only have one file, one source, because we've only been looking at this one example. But now our references reads 4, because they're aggregating each of the child nodes. All right. So similar to how you import data, there's a lot of different ways that you can code. You can select the piece of data and right-click and say code. And that will bring up this box where you would find the code that's the relevant theme and select that. You can also use this quick coding bar along the bottom. And I find that useful if maybe you have a really complicated coding structure and there's a code that you're using over and over again, and you just, it's maybe a bit burdensome to keep expanding all of your little plus and minus marks. So you would just select it. Oops. I'm just going to select it. And then down here say, find your correct code, which it's already showing up as Eduphoria. So let's say I had it. I would just type in Eduphoria, and then I'm going to press this little button that has the green check mark to code it. And nothing really has changed because this piece of text was already coded. But I did just want to point that out. So there are just some different ways that you can go about coding. Right, and then also, if you have a code that you're using over and over again, you can add it to your quick access tab by right-clicking and selecting add to quick access. And you can see it just popped up right there. All right. So that's kind of the main overview of how you code in a Word file, which is really probably the most common type of coding that we do. But I do also want to show how you can code in a PDF. All right. So if you're using sometimes you might have a piece of data that is in a PDF document. If you are doing a document review, if you have flyers or teacher lesson plans, you have handwritten notes or observation notes, or even if you have non-textual data like pictures or graphics, you can also code those in NVivo. So this is actually the same copy of the source that we just coded, so you'll have to use your imagination a little bit. So if it's a protocol that looks like this and it's pretty much all text that you can select, you will code the same way that you did if it was a Word document, where you select the text and drag it and drop it over to the appropriate code. So I just pulled I thought it was very exciting, it was a nice, bright, clean package, etc., over to that positive code that we used before. So now you can see that since I'm in a different data source in this PDF, that the number of files has increased to 2 and the number of references has increased to 3. So that works pretty much the same way. But let's say that it's not text that you can code easily, that the PDF won't recognize as text. If it's handwritten or if it's a graphic or a picture, you can still code it, and you would right-click and go to selection mode and change it from text to region. And in this case, you would just select the image or whatever it is that you're interested in coding and drag it and drop it as well. So you can see it recognized that and coded and added one more reference up to 4. All right. All right. So I want to show a third common type of coding that we do at AIR, and that's coding open-ended survey responses. So I'm going to walk through how to do that. Again, by going to import, and this time we can't choose files. We're going to choose Excel because that's the format that our survey data is in. I'm going to select it and open it again. And so this is one of the really cool features that NVivo can do. And that is our survey import wizard. So on this, this box pops up, and it's really just telling you what NVivo is going to do with the survey data that I'm importing from Excel. It's telling us that our unique respondents to the survey will be stored as cases. And remember, those are that's the structure in NVivo that identifies your unit of observation. And we'll talk about that more in a future training. It's also telling us that it's going to create the close-ended questions as case attributes, which will allow us to compare respondents by demographic or other values. And I'll talk about that in a future training. And then finally, it's going to take those open-ended questions that we want to do some qualitative analysis on and create those as nodes. So the next thing NVivo is asking is to check the data format. So it asks how many rows are used for your question headers. And so right now it's defaulting to 1, and it's creating the first row in our spreadsheet as variable labels, which is what we want it to do. But if we didn't have it like that, we could select 0, and you'd see that they're creating variable labels, column 1, column 2, column 3. But in this case, our first row is our labels, so we want to select 1. It's also asking for the order of your dates. In this data set, we don't have any dates, so we don't need to worry about that piece. So you can click on Next. And in this tab, it's really just asking where you want to save the stuff that it's pulling in. It's also important to know that if you are importing a survey data, that you do have a unique ID for each respondent. If we go back, we can see in our data set we have a row ID, which will serve as our unique ID. All right, so in this tab, NVivo is just asking us to double check that they classified everything right. They usually do a pretty good job, but you can see they pulled these first 4 pieces of data as close-ended, which seems to be correct. Respondents, districts, and years of experience. And then they've identified these 3 questions: why use other systems, benefits of student GPS, and suggestions for student GPS as open-ended. If there's anything that we weren't interested in having in our NVivo data set, maybe we don't care about what district they're in. We could say, don't import that. All right, we could press finish. All right, so it seems to be done. The green bar has reached the end, so we can press close. And now let's see what NVivo has done. So you can see in our Files tab, we have an open-ended survey example that's been imported with 361 codes and 2,000 some references. And it automatically opened the survey file. You can see it pretty much looks like how it did in its original format. You can see that these items that we described as closed-ended are in gray, which means we can't code them. They're already done. But these open-ended questions are in white, and we'll be able to code those as you would any other kind of qualitative data. But we can't really, it's not very user-friendly to look at it like this. So I'll show you what else NVivo did when it was importing that our survey data. Okay. So NVivo also, if you remember, it asked us to create cases. You can see under our little case bubble that we have a new folder that's been created called Open-Ended Survey Example. So NVivo has created, for each individual unique row, they've created a case representing a respondent to the survey. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a future training, but I did want to show you that that's what NVivo did in that step. The other thing that NVivo did was they took those open-ended survey questions and created nodes. So if we go to the folder that's been automatically created, open-ended survey example, you can see we have 3 new nodes that correspond to each of those open-ended questions. So if we expand them, so let's choose, maybe let's choose benefits of student GPS. We've expanded it, and we can see all of the responses to that open-ended survey question. And this is going to now in a format that's going to be much easier for us to code than looking at it as a spreadsheet. One thing I do want to point out is that the survey data is stored in segments of 100. So if you get to the 100th reference down here, you're not actually done, because you want to look at the bottom and see that it's section 1 of 3. So you want to go to the next page to find all of the data that is for this question. Right. So now that we have it stored in this node, what we can do is pretty much code it the same way that you coded your interview data. But although we can see that there are 487 references, that really represents the number of people who received the survey. Not every person who received the survey answered the open-ended question. So we want to, one thing that you don't have to do but can be helpful to do is create a sub-node that'll help us figure out how many people actually responded to the question. So I'm going to call this sub-node responses. Okay. And then the next thing that you want to do is go down to this tab on the right-hand side called Dataset. And what this will do is allow us to see all of the responses to this question on one page rather than broken down into 3 pages in segments of 100, like it shows you under references. Okay. So what you want to do is, I'm just going to think probably. Okay. Right-click and say select all. So we can get all of this is selecting all of the different responses to this first question of benefits of student GPS. And then we want to right-click and say code. When the data is in this table format, it's not going to be very helpful. It's going to be kind of, you're not going to easily be able to drag and drop all of the selected items as you would normally. So we're just going to use this alternative way of coding and say code. And then we're going to have to find the node that we're looking for, which is our responses. And we know that that's nested under open-ended survey example, benefits of student GPS, and responses. So we're going to click that and say, OK. So it's going to code all of this data as responses. Great. You can see that although 487 people received this survey, only 227 responded to this specific question. So that can help us if we are trying to calculate a percentage of people who responded to this question. So let's say whatever our main theme is, quick access to student information, for example, we can calculate that as a percentage of people who responded to this question rather than people who received the survey. That might be a more accurate way of talking about the data. All right. So you would really just code, now that we have it under this responses tab, you can create emergent themes as we did earlier to code our data. So I don't know, for this first one, you can create a theme that's like one-stop shop. And we can code this first reference that says all the information I need in one location as one-stop shop by dragging and dropping. And so I'm not going to keep demonstrating because we went over this earlier, but you'll just continue on coding as you did in this first section of the training. All right, and that's really kind of the end. Those are the main tasks that you'll be asked to perform if you are working as an analyst on the member of a qualitative team. Again, I'm doing an intermediate training, and in that training, I'll go over some of the more sophisticated things you can do with NVivo, and some of those that I have sort of name dropped throughout this training on cases, classifications, running queries, and other more advanced features. All right, thanks for attending this training. Again, check out the resources that we have online on AIR portal, or if you have questions that you can't figure out, definitely feel free to contact me at bmonahan, MONAHAN, @AIR.org. Thanks.